So it becomes not only a Jewish story, of course, it's an imperial story, it's a colonial story of an island that is strategically important to the British Empire and also perceived so far away and far away from what? From Europe and from America. So we cannot use Trinidad. It's too close to America. People will see. But in Mauritius, we can create a Dachau.
Genocide is a new word combining the Greek word genos meaning race or group, with the root of the Latin sidere meaning to kill.
Became interested in genocide because it happened so many times.
Power is all against one. Violence is the opposite. The extreme is one against all.
This is Not to Forgive, but to Understand, a podcast series discussing genocide studies with experts and those connected to its critical questions. I am Luis Gonzalez Aponte, co-host with Saba Karim.
And what we're about is really to try to understand why evil happens, why there are perpetrations in genocidal scenarios and scenarios of mass atrocity. Not to forgive, but to understand.
Forgive, but to understand.
Not to forgive, but to understand.
Today's episode features Roni Mikel Arieli, a cultural historian and teaching and research fellow at Gurion University's Rabb Center for Holocaust Studies. Mikel Arieli specializes in modern Jewish history, African studies, Holocaust and genocide studies, and memory studies. Today we discuss her work on Jewish detainees exiled to Mauritius during World War II, a story of colonial entanglement, survival, and remembrance. Please enjoy our conversation.
We're happy to have you here today, Roni, for this interview about a very important aspect of history, least known by many people in Mauritius and abroad. In 1940, 1,581 Jewish detainees, men, women, and children, arrived in Mauritius, which was then under colonial rule, from mandatory Palestine and were detained in the prison of Beau Bassin, coincidentally my hometown. Tell us more about that, and why were they in that vulnerable position in the first place?
Thank you so much for having me. So yes, this is a very unknown and unresearched until very recently episode in Jewish history, but also in Mauritius history. It actually begins in Europe following the World War II. And the rise of Nazism in Germany, and of course the expansion of the Third Reich. At first, the Nazis, when they imagined a world without Jews, they aimed for pushing Jews into immigration. So cleaning the Reich from Jews were by encouraging Jews to immigrate outside of the Reich. But we do know that there were at the time very limited options for Jews who actually wanted to leave their homelands in Europe. And this is a story of what we all know as Aliyah Bet in Zionist history, where 3,500 Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe and Central Europe, so Czechoslovakia, Austria, Germany, Poland, and other places, actually embarked on 3 ships from Bratislava through Tulsa, Romania, on their way to Palestine, to British-mandated Palestine. This was a very diverse and heterogenic group of people. As you said, women, children, elderly, and of course, men. And I'll give you only a few examples. So the Czechoslovakian group was a few hundreds of young men and women, very Zionist, many of them active in Zionist movements, such as Hachalutz and Maccabi. And they were actually very much prepared for making aliyah, for immigrating into Palestine. Many of them went through training, agricultural training, in order for them to actually contribute to the build of Eretz Israel. And they arrived actually around 9 months before They actually leave Bratislava, and they are held there in a building that is turned into a camp for a long duration until the ships are ready for them. So this is one group. But if we speak about the Viennese, we speak about more than 600 men, women, and children, families that were able to get visas and to actually escape. 100 of the men from the Viennese group were actually, after the Kristallnacht, the November pogrom in 1938, they were sent to Dachau and later some even to Buchenwald. And they were released after a few months under the condition that they would leave at once with their families. And those are only two of the many groups that built this what we can say human cargo, because and they of course did not know each other before. The 3,500 Jewish refugees were on board three ships, the Milos, the Pacific, and the Atlantic. They set sail from Tulsa, Romania, on the way to Haifa. As I said, some were Zionists, some were not, some were religious, some were secular, and they all had to get along. Those ships were not meant to put so many people on. So if we focus on the Atlantic, which is the ship that our people, the ones that were eventually deported to Mauritius, were on, they put 1,700 people on a ship that was prepared for 700. So it was very, very crowded. The sanitary conditions were very bad. And as I said, many elderly, many children, and no water, not enough food. It was only this voyage through the Black Sea towards Eretz Israel was a nightmare. The two ships, the Milos and the Pacific, arrived in early November to Haifa. When they arrived, the British authorities already had what we all know as the white paper, the British white paper of 1939. And this British white paper was an immigration policy, practically preventing Jews from entering Palestine. Those Jews who arrived on the two ships were considered illegal immigrants. And a ship called the Patria was purchased by the British as a deportation ship. It waited for the refugees when they arrived, and all of the refugees that were on the Milos and the Pacific were moved onto the Patria. And the conditions on the Patria were actually very good compared to the other ships, but very soon the refugees realized that they are actually being held on a prison ship. We will go back to the Atlantic. We have 1,700 men, women, and children still on their way to Palestine. They have a Greek crew on board that is not Jewish, of course. And as they approach a British territory, they start to be very stressed, and they decide to throw all the coal to the sea in order to prevent the ship from continuing to travel. And the refugees, the younger one, actually take over the ship. They take all the crew, lock them in a room at the bottom of the ship, and they actually, with British ships escorting them, they arrive in Greece and then Cyprus and Haifa. They arrive on 24th November. When they arrive, their friends are already on the Patria. And until the evening, we have 143 women and children from the Atlantic that are already being transferred in small ships to the Patria. The rest are supposed to be transferred to the Patria over the next day. But at 9 o'clock in the morning on November 25, an explosion is happening on the Patria. Apparently, the Haganah, which was the military organization of the Jewish Yishuv in Palestine, they tried to prevent the ship from being deported, and they put some explosives into the ship. They send a message to the people on board, telling them, please, at 9 o'clock, be on the ship and not at the bottom. But of course, they had many people that were ill, that were not. And the ship actually drank like in very, very quickly. 267 people die, and the rest are being rescued and brought to the shore. The Atlantic people are watching their friends and family, their colleagues, dying. This is a very tragic moment. It takes another 10 days or so. And then the Atlantic people are being moved to a camp in Atlit near Haifa, a refugee camp, a detention camp. But where they meet their fellow friends, the survivors of the Patria, but they're being held in a separate part of the camp. And there is actually a fence that separates them from the survivors of the Patria. Everyone are pretty sure that this is their last stop, that eventually they'll be free, and they are in Palestine, they are in Eretz Israel, and everything will be okay. But on December 8th, in the evening, they are being told that they will be deported over the next day. They need to get all of their belongings and be prepared. And they decided they will not go without resisting. So everyone are staying, the women separately, the men separately, but they are all naked. They are not packing their stuff. They are pretty sure that the British will not feel comfortable to evict naked women. At around 8 o'clock, there are a lot of military British forces surrounding the camp, and they're starting to violently evict the men. And then, of course, the women, some of them were actually able to pack their stuff very quickly. They are put on trucks on their way to Haifa, to the harbor. There they have two ships, the New Zealand and the Joan de Witt, two Dutch ships that were chartered for their deportation. The British police are actually searching them before they're being put on the ship in order to make sure that they don't have knives or any weapon. But testimonies actually say that they actually confiscate some of the Jews' belongings, like glasses or watches or personal belongings. And some of the testimonies will say that what the Nazis did not take from those Jews, the British did on that day. It takes them 17 days to reach Mauritius. And well, you know, most of them never heard of Mauritius, never knew even where is it on the map. And some of the more educated refugees start telling stories about monkeys and lions that are running around and this exotic imagination of the island. And then they approach on December 26th, the day after Christmas. And they are very much surprised to see roads, to see buses, to see a city. They approach Port Louis. British administratives are getting on the ship, and eventually they're putting all of the refugees on buses. And as they cross on their way to Beau Bassin, they see locals throwing flowers at them and cheering them. What I know now from my archival work was that that the idea of sending Jewish refugees to Mauritius was planned very much earlier before the refugees even left Europe. I could find inner discussions, but also publications in local newspapers in Mauritius, speaking about the possibility of sending 4,000 Jewish refugees to Mauritius since August 1940. So this is December, and the Mauritius is a British colony. When the refugees arrive, there is already local legislation to legislate their presence on the island. So we can see that they are defined, their legal status, they are defined as European detainees, which is very important because they arrive as helpless Jewish refugees, but they have their own nationalities. And this nationality has a lot of meaning in the imperial context. The meaning is dual. On the one hand, many of them have passports of the Reich, and I was able to locate many telegrams and correspondence between the British authorities claiming that among those refugees, we may find some enemy agents. And so they were not even sure about their identities. And the idea, Lord Lloyd, the head of colonies, the Minister of Colonies, he said that there is no chance that the Nazis would allow so many Jews to escape without taking the opportunity to plant enemy aliens among them. So this was one part of their European nationality that was problematic. But on the other hand, they were European. They were, many of them, very talented and educated. We had engineers, we had artists, we had teachers. So at a very early point, the British authorities in Mauritius realized that we can also gain some benefit to the colony if we make use of their European characteristics. And one of the sentences there is a diary written by Aaron Zwergbaum, who was a Czech Jewish refugee, a lawyer, and a very Zionist. And when he writes about their arrival to Mauritius and the very warm hospitality and welcome they received from the local population, he said that it was very surprising and it was stark, comparing to the attitude that they received from whites in Europe. He called that, he wrote in English, he wrote the attention and the welcome that we received from the Mauritian colored population was very pleasant and surprising. And then again, those trucks arrived at the Beau Bassin prison. And the refugees arrived, they are put into the prison, and the door is locked. And they realize that they are not free. So they are alive. They escaped Dachau, they escaped Buchenwald, they escaped the Nazi regime. They were freed from the athlete camp in Haifa only to find themselves in a detention camp in Mauritius. And well, they arrive there. The men are being held in the prison cells. So they have, each man will receive its own cell. They are not locking the doors. But the women and children are brought into a separate compound where huts are being established for them. So they live 30 to 40 women and children together in huts. And there is a wall separating between the men camp and the women and children camp. So no family life as well. And those two realizations, one, that they are not free, and the other, that they cannot actually be a community and maintain normal family life, those for them are very devastating. And I think that most of the protests that the refugees are organizing at the beginning are mainly around the right to have family life. So at the beginning, the British, and this is, I must say, this is an imperial policy to separate sex, to separate between men and women and children. It was not an anti-Semitic issue or something like that. But still, we're talking about Jewish refugees and not about criminals. But that's the thing. For the British authorities, those refugees, they committed a crime against the British mandate policies. So, this is the reality, that they find themselves in. At the beginning, the married couples are permitted to meet twice a week in distinct times outside in an open area and with guards. And many of the testimonies of the children, it's really interesting how the children recall how they eventually their parents used to actually create tents, and the children used to sit outside the tent, and the parents used to do what they were doing inside the tent. And here we have 60 babies born at Beau Bassin. Eventually, I want to say that the protest that was led by the women, I must say, succeeded, and they were allowed, after a year or so, the married couples were allowed to, so the women received permits to go into the men prison, and there they had more privacy. But it created another interesting phenomenon, because if only married couples were able to meet, so we need to have a lot of married couples. So you can see a lot of marriages, a lot of weddings happening very early on. And I want to say that there was this combination of the British understanding that they need to keep the detainees busy in order for them to be loyal to the empire. And the detainees need to have some kind of a community and normality that created this very unique cultural life on camp. So the detainees they established 2 synagogues, one Reform, one Orthodox, of course. They had a youth movement. They had schools and kindergartens. They had bakeries, and they had workshops where they actually produced toys and furniture and all kinds of stuff, and a lot of artworks. And you can see so many amazing even one-man workshops that were established there. So I'll give you one example. there was Alfred Heller, a German refugee who escaped Munich. And in Munich, he was in the industry of creating paper. And in Mauritius, he was able to use local plants in order to create special paper, decorative papers, and then to sell it on the island. Uh, so, uh, and this was only one example. As I said, many artists, and they created in 1941, they created an exhibition where they displayed their artwork, and it was sold to the local population. And interestingly, when I first arrived in Mauritius in 2019, I was able to locate two families who still have some artwork that their family members bought from the refugees, which for me was an amazing trace of the refugees that is still there on the island. And I'll get there in a moment, because when I arrived in Mauritius, I was not sure what I will find. I knew that there was the Jewish cemetery, where 126 of the detainees that did not survive are buried. But I didn't know what else I will find. But if we'll get to the cemetery was one of the first things that were established. As the refugees arrived, one of the detainees passed away from typhoid, and they very soon realized that they have to find a location for a cemetery, and of course they got a space besides a local cemetery. So this was one of the first things that happened. The other thing that happened was the creation of the camp hospital. So they arrived, they were very sick. Many of them arrived carrying a lot of pandemics from their long journey. And the local population newspapers reveal how there was a huge anxiety. This was a very small island, only 400,000 people, and pandemics were very, dangerous. And they were very anxious about the fact that those refugees will arrive to local hospitals and will spread their pandemics all over the island. And there was a clear demand from the government to create a separate hospital for the detainees, which happened eventually. It was occupied by local doctors who brought their professional knowledge about local pandemics, malaria particularly, and the other staff was, of course, nurses and doctors from Danzig, from the Jewish refugees community. So they were very busy. They also established a jazz band called the Beau Bassin Boys, which was very popular among the British commandants, which decided to give them permission to actually do concerts outside the camp. And they were the first to get permission to work outside the camp. And they did a lot of performances in weddings and local events. So this is also an amazing thing, not only because this is another trace we can find, it's also that it opened the opportunity of other refugees to use their own skills and in order to contribute to gain some money. And we find many refugees who worked as teachers in local schools, as art teachers and language teachers. We know of engineers among the refugees that worked around the island, maintaining electricity lines and communication lines. So they were very busy, but still everything was very strict. Even when they were permitted to go to the market or to go to the cinema, It was only, the gender separation was clear. It was under supervision, and it was very fragile. It was they did not have a normal routine that was stable. Uh, Everything that happened on the outside affected them. And one example is from August 1943, where U-Bahn, so there was this U-Bahn war at the Indian Ocean, where one of the submarines, the British submarines, was hurt around Port Louis, and rumors started that the detainees had radio and they were communicating codes to the enemy. And at once, all of their privileges were completely canceled, and the camp was shut down, by military forces, and no one explained anything. So this was on, and it happens every once in a while. So it was very unstable, and eventually in February 1945, they received the announcement that they will be released, that they will eventually be allowed to go back to Palestine. Although it took another 6 months, and only in August 1945 they went on the Franconia and arrived in Haifa. And later, of course, not everyone stayed in Eretz Israel. Some went to other places as well.
So this is wonderful. I mean, I have a lot of questions for you here, but I do want to point out something that you mentioned in your paper. There was a Shertok, who was the secretary of the Jewish Agency's political department at the time, and he basically described the deportation and eventual incarceration to be very oppressive. And he even went on to describe the prison in Beau Bassin as a British Dachau. How was this received and interpreted by other detainees?
So I want to say that it was Churchill who mentioned the British Dachau. But it was before the Beau Bassin prison was actually established. I will say that when Lord Lloyd started looking for colonies that are potentially can actually take over refugees or illegal immigrants, as he called them, he turned to Mauritius, but he also turned to Trinidad. And when he turned to the governor of Trinidad, he actually said that those immigrants come from European countries. We have nothing over them. We cannot prove that they are not enemies. They will need to be guarded and behind barbed wires. And Churchill got this telegram, and he was very upset. And he said, Mauritius is one thing, but one cannot imagine creating a British Dachau so close to America. And for me, this says a lot about the British imagination of Mauritius, because Mauritius was, in many ways, it was a strategic point for the British during the war in the Indian Ocean, but it was also very far from sight. And it became, in many ways, an exile island. It became the island of not the enemies of the empire, but the people that the empire doesn't know what to do with. And I will give some examples, and very shortly, but together with the refugees, we will find in March 1941 a group of 70 POWs, German POWs, that are captured in the Indian Ocean, brought to a camp 1 kilometer from the Jewish camp at Rose Hill. And they're being held there for a month. And then been transferred to another camp in Kenya. So we have 1 month that we have on the one end of this small island, 70 German soldiers, and on the other end we have 1,580 Jewish refugees. At the same time, we have a German family that arrived in Mauritius in 1933. The father is a businessman, and they are being, of course, the British suspect that they are enemy aliens, and they decide to put them in the Jewish camp, but they cannot put them with the Jews. So they establish a small house close to the Jewish hospital. This house is being guarded, and of course, it's being surrounded with barbed wire. But they live together, the men, the women, and the 12-year-old daughter. And I know that only from testimonies of Jewish children who, in their testimony, said how unfair it was that their Jewish refugees who escaped Nazi-controlled Europe, were not allowed to stay as families. But then again, at the same camp, this German family, German, they say, not Jewish, they were held as a family. And there are many, many letters of complaint on this from the side of the Jewish detainees to the British authorities. And this without speaking about the exiles on the island. So we have Brother Shah, and who was being exiled to the island. And thanks to you, Sabah, I actually investigated this further. And also we have the former Prime Minister of Yugoslavia, who is being exiled in Mauritius. So it becomes not only a Jewish story, of course, it's an imperial story, it's a colonial story of an island that is strategically important to the British Empire, and also perceived so far away, and far away from what? From Europe and from America. So we cannot use Trinidad, it's too close to America, people will see. But in Mauritius, we can create a Dachau. But of course, it was not a Dachau. And to your question, I want to emphasize, it was not a brutal routine or regime. It was an unstable one, and they were not free. But, I gave my 10-year-old son, when he was 7, I wanted him to interview one of the survivors of the Mauritius that was at the time 10 years old. And he asked them what children ask. What did you do all that time? What did you learn in school? What did you play? Who did you play with? And, they had a good childhood. The children did not feel that they are imprisoned, but they were separated from their fathers, and for the older generation, it was of course very challenging. And I think that another thing that comes up very much in the memoirs, in the diaries, is this the feeling that they, particularly the younger ones, that not the children, but the equipped younger people that can contribute to the war effort, but instead they are sitting there in what they see as nowhere, doing nothing. They are being imprisoned while they can actually enlist to the British Army and contribute to the war effort. And very few, we had 3 groups that succeeded actually to enroll the Czech exiled army and the Polish one, and a very small group of Jewish brigade, but it was not easy. So this is also something that comes up, that they feel like they are useless. They want to be productive. They want to contribute. And of course they know what is happening in Europe. They have radio. They hear BBC in German, and they are following the war, and they are following the Holocaust. And I must say that the post office was very, very slow, but it was efficient. So the very first thing that happened was that the British, once the Jews arrived, they started looking for German speakers because they wanted to create the censor department for the letters. And so if there were letters, it was very slow, but they actually had, they received newspapers, of course, local newspapers, but also many, many newspapers from South Africa, from the Jewish community in South Africa. For the South African Jewish community, this group of refugees was the closest thing for them to the Holocaust. And they contributed a lot of kosher food, books, money, equipment for the workshop, and also a lot of newspapers. And the refugees also had a daily newspaper that they printed every day, which had, news from the war, and news from home, and of course, inner news, the news from what is happening inside the camp. So, yeah, so I wouldn't say that it was a Dachau, but it was certainly not what we imagine when we now think about Mauritius. We think about honeymoons, we think about resorts, yeah? But it was a prison. It's still actually an active prison.
This is really fine retelling, and I really appreciate all the details. I'm curious, as every other researcher, what were your sources and how did you gather them? Who are the people you spoke to? I'm very interested in that.
So this was my journey. I started 6 years ago. Actually, it started long before. 2014, I arrived in Johannesburg in this Jewish archive, the Jewish archive of the community. And there was a box titled Mauritius with the years of the war. And I got curious. I wrote on Holocaust Memory in South Africa at the time. I couldn't resist. I opened the box and I realized that the Jewish community in South Africa created a special committee to help the detainees in Mauritius. And I felt like, okay, this is very interesting, but it deserves more than a paragraph in my dissertation. And I waited very patiently. In September 2018, I went to the ghetto fighters' house in Israel. They have the most extensive collection of the Jewish exiles. So many of the families of the Jewish exiles donated all of their materials in 2008 to the ghetto fighters' house, and they did an amazing work digitizing everything. So I worked there a lot. Many of my Jewish sources are from this collection. And this was my very first step. And then in July 2019, I had a fellowship in Munich. And I spent a lot of time at Dachau, working at the archive, with the list of my detainees and trying to find out if and who from my men was deported to Dachau before he was deported to Mauritius. And as I said already, I was able to locate 100 men, mainly Viennese and Germans that were around Kristallnacht deported to Dachau, then Buchenwald, and were released and later deported to Mauritius. So this is another source. But over there, I was very much surprised. You would surprise to learn what you can find in public libraries. So I went to the Munich National Library, the only place that was open until midnight. And I took the opportunity that I have to work without my kids. So I worked late and I found reels of Churchill's papers from the war. And there I found a lot of diamonds. So I was able to find a lot of secret correspondence between the different colonies and the British government, and discussions in the British Parliament around Mauritius. So this was another angle. And then in September 2019, I went to do my fellowship at the USHMM in Washington, where they also have a collection which I use. Many of them are Jewish materials, but not only. So I use those materials as well. A lot of testimonies at Yad Vashem, at USC Shoah Foundation, Mauritius. So January 2020, just before COVID, I was able to be there for a week, worked at the National Archive there. And of course, at Kew, at the National Library in Britain, in London. So it's kind of a transnational archive, but I would say that adding to that, a lot of personal collection that I actually collected throughout the years. So all the detainees that I was able to locate, and I was able to locate many detainees, and second, third, fourth generation. I have a list of at least 200 people from all over the world. And many of them I interviewed. I'm an oral historian. This is my expertise. So I interviewed many of them, and I collected from them many memoirs, diaries, materials, and I'm still collecting. It's endless. So this is a very unique archive because I try to capture all kinds of voices. And if we go back to Mauritius, so in January 2020, when I was there for a week, I also did oral histories there with people who remember the detainees. So I was able to conduct 4 interviews with people who knew the detainees or one that had a family connection. Of course, none of them are Jewish, all local Mauritians. So this is another angle. And things are coming up by the minute, I swear. And whenever I do a commemoration event, and I have been doing commemoration events since August 2020 to the present, twice a year. So I get more and more materials from people. So yeah, so this is the archive, trying to capture the voices. I'm very much interested in the Jewish experience, but I'm very much also interested in the Jewish experience and its relations and encounters with the local communities. So this is the challenging part because I know how Jews remember the local population very fondly, I must say, but I don't know how Mauritians remember. So that's the challenge. But it's been a fascinating journey.
The first appearance of this important historical moment was by Genevieve Pitot in the Mauritian Shekel. Genevieve Pitot is a native Mauritian who lived in Germany but formed a close connection with one of the Jewish detainees on the island. Now, how did her work connect with yours and how did you interact with her? I also know of Nathacha Appanah's Le Dernier Frère, The Last Brother, that was also published a while ago and touched on the same subject.
So Genevieve Pitot, she was, as you said, a local Mauritian who had a very direct connection. As a child, she went to school, and one of the detainees was her art teacher. And I love this story because through Genevieve Pitot, I found Anne Frank of Mauritius. So Anne Frank Klein was a German artist, a very successful one from Berlin. She was able to smuggle her children out of Germany to Switzerland during the war, but she decided to stay. And then in 1940, she escaped, arrived eventually to Mauritius, was deported, of course, to Mauritius. And she one of those detainees that received permits to work outside of the camp. She worked at a high school. And Genevieve Pitot was an engineer in Germany. And she went to this exhibition in Berlin I think it was in the late 80s or early 90s, where she saw the picture of her art teacher from Mauritius. And then she started investigating, creating what was her life effort, the Mauritian shekel, which is until today the most comprehensive research that was done on Mauritius. And I must say that I've been visiting Frankfurt Archive, where all of the materials of Genevieve Pitot are preserved. And of course, I'm in touch with the family of Anne Frank Klein. Her older son, unfortunately, a few months ago passed away, but he was very actively involved in the book and in the publication of it in various languages. And when I started, this was the only thing that I had. So I had a Hebrew translation of the Mauritian shekel and an English one and a French one. That's it. And she did an amazing work. And then, of course, for me, I told myself, okay, if there is one person, she's not alive anymore, but of course, that remembers the detainees, so there are more. And as I said, when I came back to Mauritius in January 2020, I was actually able to interview a classmate of Genevieve Pitot, who also, she was actually able to show me how she remembered the ways that her teacher, Anne Frank Klein, taught her how to draw the portrait, the self-portrait. So for me, it was a very vivid direction because, as I said, I am interested not only in the Jewish story, but on the Jewish presence and encounters with the local population. This is not only a Jewish story. This is part of the local Mauritian history. And this brings us also to the present. So Genevieve Pitot published her book in 1998. And then we had Nathacha Appanah, which you mentioned, also a local Mauritian author who wrote a novel titled The Last Brother. And actually, I had the privilege to be in touch with Nathacha Appanah. I never met her in person, unfortunately. COVID did not allow, but we corresponded, and I also read a lot of interviews that she gave on this book. Particularly, it was actually also translated into Hebrew. And this is interesting because for me, this is another angle. This is very different from the Mauritian shekel. The Mauritian shekel is a research. And Genevieve Pitot focuses mainly on the Jewish story. I think that when I think about my project, my research project is dual because I have the history part, which is very interesting, and how Mauritian history, British history, Jewish history are being connected. But on the other hand, I'm also looking at memory. And this is where I think Nathacha Appanah's work is coming to the fore, because taking a Mauritian local Mauritian author that chooses to speak about the Jewish short episode, 4 years, 7 months in Mauritius during the war, and very emotionally and cleverly, she actually speaks about Mauritius and not about the Jewish story. So what Nathacha Appanah is doing is she creating this fictional friendship between a Jewish Czechoslovakian child and the Mauritian child in order to speak about local Mauritius under British rule. And I felt this is, and without actually minimizing or erasing the Jewish story. This fictional relationship that was never allowed, actually, in reality, allows her to create those layers of history and to reveal those encounters. And she did it, and also Alain Gentil, Gordon Gentil did it as well in another novel. But this is another fictional novel focusing on a fictional relationship between Jewish woman and a Creole or an Afro-Mauritian young man who actually speaks about the fact that Afro-Mauritians do not feel that they have roots compared to Jews who have Zionism and Indians who have, they have India as a homeland, and this is something that cannot be found in Creole society. So at the time, of course, in the 40s. So I feel like those efforts to speak about local histories that have been, put under the surface through the Jewish story on the island is fascinating. And for me, it's not only fascinating because it provides space for Mauritians to speak about their own histories. It's also a very, natural and direct lens through which we can actually teach about the Holocaust in Mauritius. So this is my educator speaking, but when you speak about memory, it's different to speak about the Holocaust that happened in Europe, to speak about Auschwitz. But when you have this concrete story that connects Mauritians to the Holocaust, it then becomes a lever or a tool to actually speak about it and speak about their own histories. So I feel like this is a very, very unique and fascinating thing that is happening in public memory in Mauritius. And I actually hope to write about it more. I feel like this is for me the direct route between history and memory. Because if the work encounters in history, they will shape the encounters that we will have in commemoration, in memory, in education.
You're based in Israel, and you just commemorated the 80th year of the arrival of the detainees in Mauritius. Present at the event were children of these detainees. What were the responses of your friends, your relatives, and other scholars who are interested in this research?
I want to say it was a very moving event, which was postponed, unfortunately, because of our tragic reality here in Israel. And I want to, with your permission, take us back to actually September 2023. September 2023, we had a huge commemoration event in Mauritius, where we had a delegation of 39 of the ex-detainees and their relatives, and many diplomats from Germany, Austria, Israel, of course, Mauritius. The vice president of Mauritius was present. And we actually created this commemoration event 3 days in Mauritius, trying to remember the detainees, to acknowledge this story. And then the idea was to have another event on September 24. And as you all know, October 7, 2023 happened, which was devastating to the entire area. And we at the beginning, we wanted to do the ceremony at the Ghetto Fighters House, which is situated in the Western Galilee, in the north of part of Israel. in September 24, but unfortunately, the war did not allow it. We were not able to do it because of the missile attacks from the north, and we had to postpone. But we said that we will not cancel. And eventually, we were able to do it in last May, 2 weeks ago. And I was very much surprised to see how many of the ex-detainees of the second, third, and fourth generation arrived, many of whom I never met before. So 140 people arrived from all over Israel. And it was very, very emotional. During the event, the head of the archives at the Ghetto Fighter House presented the collection of the Mauritian collection. And she she showed this dress of a child that was prepared to this child by her mother on the camp at Beau Bassin for Hanukkah festival. And as she presented this story about the dress, asking us, where do you think that she got the fabric and how did she do it? One of the people at the audience stood up and said, "This is the dress of my mother." And it was so very emotional because we had no idea that she's there, that she arrived. And she had no idea that her mother actually donated the dress to the Ghetto Fighters House. And this is only one story of many, many like that. People came with copies of the diaries of their grandparents, and a lot of personal letters and photographs. We have a WhatsApp group. People still are sending photos and asking, okay, who can recognize this and this and that? Yesterday I had a Zoom meeting with three brothers who actually realized that their grandfather and grandmother were deported to Mauritius. The grandfather, before he was deported to Mauritius, he was from Vienna and he was very close to Herzl, our big Herzl, yeah? And then they realized that he was actually deported to Mauritius as well. And I sat with them on Zoom, showing them some photos, and we were actually able to recognize him at the synagogue in Mauritius. So those are amazing moments, precious moments that I think I will cherish forever because, I realize that for Holocaust studies and even for Jewish history, Mauritius, the Jewish deportation to Mauritius is a very, very small and marginal episode. But for me, for the past 6 years, the understanding of 1,581 Jewish refugees equals 1,581 Jewish stories. And each story is a world. So for me, I felt like this is so important for the families and also important for me and for my research because as historians, we write a lot, we go to archives, but there is always the question of what are we doing with our knowledge? And are we okay? I was able to publish it in a Q1 journal, yeah, very, very important journal, but who will read it? Who will have access to this knowledge? So for me, this is very important, and this is part of the work. And it's I feel like it's a struggle because it's something that I've been doing not only with Mauritius, with my entire work, academic work, bringing Holocaust history into this sustained conversation with colonial, post-colonial context, and trying to really open new conceptual and methodological pathways for the field of Jewish history. And of course, this is challenging because I need a lot of pushing to do. to push Jewish history beyond this traditional Eurocentric focus, and and also we need to remember one of the things that the ex-detainees and their families say a lot is we were not remembered because we are not dead enough. And I really try to break this hierarchy of suffering, because there is enough room and space to remember all kinds of experiences. The Holocaust was not only Auschwitz, it was not only Dachau, and it was not only Majdanek. It was a devastating episode that has a lot of different angles, and it happened in a colonial world, and this is something that people forget. And those refugees were persecuted as Jews and then were deported as Jews. And not because the British authorities were anti-Semitic, but they were still persecuted because of their identity. So the Nazis persecuted them for their Jewishness, the British for their Europeanness. But at the same time, they were not free. So I feel like this double persecution is something that people need to speak about, with the limitation of understanding that there are different kinds of suffering and different levels of suffering. The Jews themselves say in their journals, in their diaries, that they realize that they are lucky because they were the ones that got away, the last one that got away. But still, they were not free. And this is something that needs to be remembered.
Was there anything interesting that happened prior, during, or after the research project that you took up that you would like to maybe discuss with us?
Yes, I think that I want to discuss something that happened in September 2023. So it was not part of my research. It was when we actually did this 3-day commemoration event in Mauritius. And as I said, we had many dignitaries, so diplomats, and there was also the Israeli ambassador. And after the events were over, an open letter to the Israeli ambassador appeared in a local newspaper in Mauritius, signed by Friends of Al-Aqsa, calling, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, welcoming the Israeli ambassador, acknowledging the suffering of the Jewish refugees, and calling him to acknowledge the suffering of the Palestinians as well. And I felt so touched and so moved by this act. I felt it was very well written and not confronting at all, and very hopeful. And this is something that I must say, whenever I come to Mauritius, I'm full of hope, because this is a very heterogenic society with a complicated history. But somehow there is this social cohesion that I wish we will have in many, many other societies all over the world. And this letter touched me in ways that I cannot understand. And then a month later, when October 7 happened, I felt like, I don't know, I felt hopeless. And maybe this is a good way of ending, because I think that for the past year and around 7-8 months now, I am very much longing to go back to that feeling that I had when I read this letter. So I think that the situation is very, very complex, and that there is a lot of suffering here in our region. But looking at Mauritius and maybe even going back to that letter, that open letter, maybe it will bring us some air and some hope.
This was Not to Forgive, But to Understand, with our guest, Roni Mikel Arieli. To our listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more discussions.